So we are This Is Rubbish. My name's Martin, and I'll be kicking us off today. We're going to be talking about food waste. So a staggering quantity of food is wasted in the world. You've probably seen it's been a lot in the headlines recently. It's anywhere from between 30 to 50% of global food is just thrown away, absolutely wasted. And there's a huge quantity of resources that go into that. The effort, the farmer getting up, 5 a.m. every morning. We have huge 70% of the world's water is used in agriculture. So this is one of the most important things for conserving water. Huge amounts of land used to grow that food, and also about 10% of Europe's carbon emissions come from food, waste food. And that's something that could be cut at detriment to nobody's quality of life, overnight. Well, not overnight. It's a bit more complicated than that. But so basically, and then quite apart from the environmental side, we've got, of course, the social side. So you may have noticed not everyone in the world has enough to eat, despite this unparalleled abundance that we have in the world. So 1 billion people approximately are going without, suffering from malnutrition or food insecurity at the moment in the world. And all the food that's wasted in Europe and America could feed those people 4 times over. So it's a terrible injustice that there's, on one hand, abundance and waste, and on the other hand, food poverty. So what This Is Rubbish are about. So food waste has been a lot in the news, but there tends to be a focus on consumer food waste, what we can do, compost bins in the home. But there's actually a huge amount of food wasted before it gets to the consumer. So actually, estimates vary, but it's usually about 50% or even more occurs in the food supply chain before it even gets to the consumer. And that builds up over, every stage in the supply chain. So you've got kind of farm level food waste, that's kind of, fruits and vegetables that are a bit the wrong size, the wrong shape. For the supermarkets, they're rejected. They're just ploughed back into the field, often in vast quantities by the ton, sometimes by the hundreds of tons. Then you've got manufacturer food level waste, stuff from the supermarket. It all accumulates into these vast figures that we've been talking about. So basically, This Is Rubbish is about structural political change. So at the moment, the political climate is very much about voluntary approaches to reducing food waste in industry. And we've seen things like the Courtauld commitment that are voluntary commitments by retailers to reduce their food waste. But what we've seen is that these targets are very low. They're badly regulated and they're very unambitious. So what we want to call for is for this food first to be measured, as no one really knows exactly how much industry is wasting. It's very undercover, it's hidden in skips the country, it's hidden rotting on the fields, it's nobody knows exactly what's going on. So first we want the government to make businesses disclose how much they're wasting, measure it, so we know what the problem is. And then once we know the scale of the problem, then we can enforce, using legislation, targets to reduce that food waste and challenge businesses to be more ambitious in their reduction as well. So it's not just consumers, everyone's pulling their weight. One of the things that This Is Rubbish does that's really unique and wonderful about this is that apart from our policy level kind of political change, the way we engage with the issue. So we're very kind of arts-based, community, participatory and celebratory organisation. So we hold feasts and it's all about communality and revaluing food. So it's not just a commodity, it's a valuable, communal and social, wonderful thing. And Poppy is going to talk a bit about the history of how this theory has been put into practice.
Can I have one of the... So I'm just going to give you a whistle-stop tour of how This Is Rubbish has come from a group of people skipping in a town in mid Wales where some of the founders were living to being here today. I'm sure some of you do a bit of dumpster diving or skipping or whatever we call it yourselves. We decided we wanted to know really what was happening further up the food chain. If there was this much food in the skip behind one small local supermarket, what's going on in the food supply chain? It's sort of, that's the photo I'm looking for. Let's have a look at that. This was sort of the image that has become our sort of like key image, the really sort of motivating factor when we went to this wholesale market in East London with the idea of just getting some free fruit to make smoothies at Climate Camp at Blackheath in 2009. And it was just such a shocking amount, such an exceptional amount of food waste on that morning. The people who went were really inspired and motivated. Well, maybe not inspired is the right word, but sort of terrified and motivated, and therefore kind of wanting to do something more about this. And the Climate Camp event was sort of very fortuitous. We met a guy called Tristan Stewart, who sort of within the world of food waste is quite a big name and has a book out called Waste. And we then partnered with him on an event called Feeding the 5,000, which is the first Feeding the 5,000 in Trafalgar Square. So on a very snowy, cold December morning, we served a liquid ton of banana and grape smoothies to the general public. And that was sort of the formative moment for This Is Rubbish, actually thinking how come people are interested, people are shocked and want to know what we have to say, and sort of engaged by this sort of really personal, upfront approach. We then did an event at the Arcola Theatre, which is sort of, this claims it's the England's leading green theatre, and we did a food waste feast there for 100 people. And this is where we sort of really started bringing the arts into it and looking at how people are interested, how people are engaged, and really getting the idea that a lot of people were interested. Yeah, pass it around, and there's, I can help. So my coordination for holding things up and talking is gone. Yes, in that book there's images of sort of the performance element we added with servers from the whole plethora of gods of food and fertility serving food, and we're really interested in the beauty of food and sort of the magic of food and well presented food, and really getting people inspired by what they're eating and talking about what they're eating as well. From the Arcola, where's our next there? Oh yeah. So at this point there wasn't really some grand strategy for This Is Rubbish, we didn't know where it was going, but we saw the opportunity to apply for People's Millions Award within Wales, which is and then had an appearance on Welsh ITV, and were very sort of fortunate and very proud to win the people's vote. So it wasn't a board of directors deciding to give us funding, it was national coverage, and people phoned in and selected to actually award us £50,000 to run a tour called Feast, which was an 8-stop tour around Wales in 2011. For this we partnered with kind of existing groups, events that are already happening, so for example the Hay Literary Festival, Swansea City Farm, an arts centre in Cardiff. So all quite different organisations, all with their own mailing lists, their own people that were interested in what they were doing, which then gave us sort of routes into a much wider audience, not just people on our mailing list, people who are already interested in food waste. And that was what was really important, is getting this wider audience engaged by what we were doing. I don't think there's anything else about Feast. Yeah, so following on from Feast, which I have this was funded by the People's Millions. I've got the evaluation here, you can come and have a look at the end if you're interested. And then from this, which was very public facing, so I really wanted to know a bit more sort of meat behind what we were saying and what we were demanding. So I'll let Holly, who is a very dedicated volunteer for that part of the project, speak.
Hello, I'm Holly. So yeah, like Poppy said, off the back of the Feast, we wanted to make sure that the policy asks were grounded in real world evidence. And so we conducted a piece of research called IFWAP, the Industry Food Waste Audit Proposal, which is what this report is about. And it was to explore the feasibility of a mandatory food waste audit within the entire food industry, so looking at every actor in the food industry. And we did that through creating a new team of people. So it's all of the different projects that we've worked on have been rolled out by different groups of people. And this one had a core team, but also a wider group of volunteers. And we were funded by the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, which gave us £15,000 to do that. And so this team interviewed about 20 people, and with using semi-structured interviews. And what we found challenged the assumption that the industry would generally be against a mandatory food waste audit and regulation and targets to reduce food waste. And actually it turned out that there's a big diversity within the food industry as a whole. And so out of that came 3 main recommendations, which were, the first one is to strengthen existing voluntary agreements. So there's something called the quartile commitment, which is not very stringent. So we want to separate targets for food waste that's different to general waste, create longer term targets, and engage the whole supply chain in the issue of food waste. The second recommendation is to pave the way for regulation in case the voluntary agreements fail. So that means government regulation and enforcement. And then the third recommendation is engaging in wider debate and public engagement around the issue of food waste. And so the report that we've got here, which you can have a look at the end, was then presented at the Houses of Parliament. And it was co-written by a few people here today, and like with a lot of input from the volunteers. So it's just another way we help facilitate participation when we're working together. And I'll pass you over to Caitlin now, who will talk about like participatory arts and collaboration in a bit more detail.
Hello everyone, I'm losing my voice a bit, so bear with my hoarseness. We've spoken a lot about This Is Rubbish as a very focused campaign that's looking at industry behaviour and how to reduce the 50% of food waste that occurs in the industry. But something that's very close to all of our purpose, I guess, is using creative arts and participatory spaces to facilitate these conversations. And we came from, going and feeding a lot of people with quite theatrical production of fruit smoothies, and then we went to do the Arcola, and the medium really is the message. So we can stand up and talk and lobby and do direct lobbies and a lot of blogging and publicity, but we really value our public engagement, and hopefully you can see some pictures of the events that we feel best facilitate these conversations. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about some sort of art history of where we feel we fit in, because I think it's important to really advocate participatory processes, but it's very interesting to look back and see we're part of a bigger history of dialogue through the arts and through art as social practice. There's a movement some of you might be aware of called the Situationists in the 50s, and a guy called Guy Debord, and they really advocated this idea of art as process and art as participation, not art as commodity or product. So our ideas about art really reflect our ideas about the redistribution of power in how our food system is managed and what motivates efficiencies in our food system. We really advocate participation and co-creation, and hope that by creating interactive food spaces we can facilitate conversations of a practical and community and political level that might not happen if we just were doing hard lobbying, just going and writing these reports. So we have a real big way of engaging lots of different people. And then, we're we feel inspired by the Situationists. I feel like there's a great example of, they used to do this like walking practice. I can't remember what it's called, but you walk around the city as a group and you just walk wherever you want to go and you stop and talk. It was something about tides, like tides of recognising the landscape of your city, and you'd walk collectively and just go wherever you wanted, and then you'd stop and share why you felt compelled to go in this direction or this direction. And this is a much more conversational approach to relating to things that matter to us as communities, and we hope that by facilitating really large-scale, quite interactive feasts, we can facilitate similar conversational shapes in how we relate back to our food system and who controls our food system. The other practice that's interesting to bear in mind is relational aesthetics, is this idea of the arts and shared spaces giving a platform for different conversations and connections of people, and food does this anyway. You know, you just need to start chopping loads of vegetables in a public space, or doing a salad toss, which you're going to do later, or having a feast that's a drop-in feast, and people come and they converge and they just start talking. And if we can relate these conversations back to clear tactical messages, our food industry is really, really aggressively driven by money, so much so it devalues the food that we see. It's vast scale, and what can we do about it through these processes of participation? And we have some ideas, but we also like to facilitate like what everyone else can do and how we have those kind of democracy in action spaces. And we have some pledge cards over here and some information on the bale. If you want to go and like share any of your ideas or feedback on what we've been discussing, we'd really welcome that, and we collate it and then use it in our thinking for our next missions of how we go out and have conversations. I just feel that it's strange, this idea of really wanting to use symbolic, kind of quite theatrical spaces to convey this message. And as an activist, and we're all involved with lots of different projects, often you can have a one-line wonder using hard logic and facts and quite clear statistics alone to persuade. And actually, this idea of emotional intelligence and social and emotional connection to the issue is so richly afforded by food and ceremony. So that's the other word I've been trying to include, is ceremony. How ceremony can in itself revalue the issue. We don't need all the 50%, 70% water, 1 ton of food waste, 5 tons of CO2 saving. It's the ceremony that compels people to come back and to share some greater connection with each other and the community and the ideas. And I personally think that affords a much bigger structural change than just using hard logic to win arguments at a policy level. We're talking about cultural shifts, so how we organise and communicate and convey the changes that we think we can see. So yeah, that's a little bit about kind of just reiterating the importance of participatory arts and ceremony and how we go about and communicate. And I mean, with this report we got a bit more formal, and that's because we felt the need. We were communicating these 2 policy changes through lots of pop-up arts events and interactive spaces, but we wanted to show that we also had a grounded confidence in what we were saying, because otherwise a lot of people are like, oh, you're just artists doing feasts and we all know that food waste happens, but how do you know that this is a political reality? And we're like, well, we've done quite a bit of reading, but we need to go back to the food supply chain and ask the farmers and ask the manufacturers and distributors. So we've gone a bit formal recently, but we're coming back to creative engagement and conversation, and Poppy's going to talk a little bit about where we're at on that front.
Yeah, I'll just sum up sort of what we've been doing recently and brought us here, and then we'll have a question and answer session. So the group that's sort of sitting here in front of you, and someone roaming with a camera, is sort of the sub-heading of This Is Rubbish, under the title of Gleaner's Voyage, which is sort of ideas we're trying out this summer. We've done a previous event at a food and drink festival in Walthamstow, North East London, called Appetite, and that was a whole month-long programme of events going on locally. And we spent a weekend on the sort of fruit and veg market. It's meant to be the longest street market in Europe, pretty much fabric and fruit and veg all the way down. So it's a very interesting place for us to pitch up and try and talk to visitors to the market, shoppers, and the people who are going to the wholesalers day in, day out, finding out what's going on. It was a very interesting comparison. The next day it was the farmers market, exactly the same site, and a cycling festival. So we've got 2 very contrasting audiences. and a lot of people making puppets of wonky vegetables, which was wonderful. So the Gleaners Voyage is trying out, we're doing different events this summer with very different groups, different festivals, to just have a bit of an experiment, see what the audience feedback as well, see what is interesting people, and sort of convey what This Is Rubbish has been doing up until now. I think to reiterate what Catelyn was saying about the, the values and sort of the inspiration, we'd rather people take that away than a few statistics, because it's much more likely that you'll tell your friend tomorrow about this kind of thing you took part in, a fruit salad toss, and you got fruit at the end of it, and you might got a bit splattered of strawberries on the way up, or than as the statistics, as I was saying. So that's sort of what the Gleaners Voyage is going to do later, although we don't know the timing yet. We're then hoping to get sort of continuation funding for the Gleaners Voyage to do a tour throughout the UK. Sort of ambitions of horse-drawn tables rocking up in marketplaces may become a reality next year. We don't know yet. That would be the next step. And
Die hard fishing.
She has actually managed to find a horse, yes. We have one recruit, one horse. We need some master tables on wheels that open up and invite people in to help with the preparation as well as the dining and the whole experience. And I think what I meant to say about the feast tour, and would be a similar sort of style to the Gleaners Voyages, to be in one space for a couple of days, so to really try and get people to return, to get to know what we're doing. So there was educational activities, fun stuff for kids, as well as roundtable discussions and sort of the more serious element, and then the feasting and the fun. Don't think I've really got anything more to say on the Gleaners Voyage at the moment. We're just at the beginning, we're just setting sail. And if you'd like to join us on the voyage, there's a mailing list. Kat also forgot to say that the food on that hay bale, you're welcome to take. It was all collected as surplus yesterday. I mentioned this magnificent salad toss that is going to happen later, but we don't know what time.
But it's going to take us where?
Behind you, off the balcony. We'll clear tables, we'll get tarpaulin out, there'll be flying tomatoes and salad dressing. Salad dressing and trapeze? We're not sure yet. But we're now open for questions, comments, ideas.
Can you tell us about the Schnipple Disco and the Gleaning Network?
Well, Martin did.
Oh,
Yeah.
hello. I organise the Gleaning Network, so I can definitely tell you about that. So a similar project, similar but separate project that's going on, just setting up in the UK at the moment, is called the Gleaning Network. And basically gleaning is this sort of ancient practice that basically goes back hundreds of years, whereby people, poor peasants from their local village would go onto a field and gather up all of the crop that was going to be wasted on the farm. And we're trying to revive this recently, so it's sort of fallen out of fashion. It doesn't go well with corporate agriculture, it's gone out of fashion. But we're trying to bring it back in a big way. And basically, in its modern form, this takes the form of, as I was saying earlier, tons, sometimes hundreds of tons. And in one case, I spoke to a farmer who is anticipating that he's going to waste later this year 500,000 pumpkins, which is quite staggering. And this is just because they're the wrong size and shape and so on. And that's predictable amount of his crop that is outgraded every year and just ploughed back into the field as compost. And if there's if Halloween and typically a celebration of the wonky in society, outgrades this and much, so we know we have a problem. So what we do is take groups of, say, 20 people down to a farm and pay their travel expenses to go down on a bit of a day out, and we harvest all of that food. The farmers let us onto their land, and we harvest that food, load it into a van, and we distribute it to food poverty charities. And at the moment in the US, this is a huge phenomenon. They save, thousands of millions of tons of food a year, but it's just not happening in the UK. So over the past year, we're trying to set this up. We're setting up hubs around Bristol, around Manchester, around Cambridge, around Kent and London, around Brighton. It's really gathering momentum, and we hope you're going to save thousands of tons of food, hopefully. So it's a fun day out. And if you want to join us, then come up and talk to me afterwards, please.
What about the Schnipple disco?
Schnipple disco, right, I may be wrong about this, but I think that's related to disco soup.
Yeah.
Right, so Schnipple disco is a movement that started in Germany and has since taken off massively in France. And they're basically, bloody cool. And they essentially are a group of kind of raver food waste activists who gather in a kind of exuberant fashion and chop up lots of waste food to disco music or other music, lots of other types of music, whatever takes their fancy really. And they're very cool. After the Feeding the 5,000 event in Paris, they exploded, well, not literally, but they went from 3 groups to about 15 groups in the last half a year, and we're thinking of setting up a similar thing in the UK soon. So look out for that. Hooray!
So I'm just thinking of an example. At CAT, we did the finale feast of our feast tour, the Centre for Alternative Technology, and we had a tiny bit of soft fruit left over. We went to a local, it was in November, and we went to a local, enormous orchard actually, just outside Hay, kind of local within Wales, quite an hour and a half drive, but the pickup was massive. And we scaled our pickup quite well to 100 people, because it's always interesting cooking 3-course meals when you don't know what you're going to get, and it's quite a mission of creativity in itself. And we had a small amount left over. We composted that, but if we've got pigs nearby, we'll feed it to pigs or compost. But we also ordinarily at Swansea City Farm there was a manufacturer of vegan cheesecakes. They had crates of surplus test run stock they've just been mass producing a test run of cheesecakes, so we got hold of those and we froze them in the farm and basically gave out massive batches of cheesecakes to our feasters and people that were visiting the farm the day before the feast and the day after. So if you've got an audience or you've got people that are coming to eat, you can normally offload sort of smaller amounts of remaining edible food, but yeah, if we have anything left, it will compost or pig feed. And that raises just quickly a really interesting question about anaerobic digestion, which is the sort of often justification of existing systemic food waste to channel food waste into biodigesting technology to generate biogas and mulch, fertilizer mulch for the land. And it's a good alternative if there's no other use for that food, but there's been a lot of incentivization of anaerobic digesters on farms in the UK, and it almost justifies a feedstock of food that we could use to redistribute or eat, and the energy efficiency conversion of that calorific content of the food to energy out is really, really low. So what do you do with edible food is a really important question, especially when it gets scaled up and it becomes part of the conversation about greening our energy economy, because we'd rather see reduction of energy and in kind of advocacy of decarbonisation first, rather than going, oh, we've got this leftover food and we can generate energy for higher consumption of whatever, fans or lots of, excessive energy use. So that's quite an important associated thinking point. Has anyone got any other questions?
I've got a comment and a question.
So the comment was, I don't know if you've heard of a common cause. Yeah, because it sounded like what you were talking about with the combination of doing the reports and the sort of hard science, but also the promoting a sense of community among people. That seemed like a really practical application of the Common Cause manifesto, which is really heartening because I'd only really heard about it used in a marketing sort of way before. The other thing was, do you have any resources for people who might want to organise a similar kind of feast to help you with scaling and that kind of thing to avoid having waste?
Thank you. One of us over there actually worked for PERC recently, the Public Interest Research Centre that generated the Common Cause thinking, and because we emerged in Machantlath where PERC is based, there was a lot of conversations with people that work in the natural conversations between projects, and we use Common Cause processes in the establishing of our values when we get together as an organisation and kind of vision and keep on a values-led approach rather than just what we want to create and see. So yeah, it's an awesome tool and we think it's great. At the moment we're unfunded, so we seem to get funded on a project by project basis, and obviously we're kind of thinking about trying to get core funding because we all work in other jobs and keep this going on a voluntary basis until we manage to get some money for a project. And we're also thinking about how to generate revenue. So the point is we're available, we inbox, we answer emails, and we're all checking regularly, and we can help share our experience. We really support other people taking this is rubbish and sourcing surplus, and we can share we've got a big list of suppliers of surplus that we've set up relationships with from farm through to retail. And actually recently, we're not sure what we think about this, but Tesco got in touch with us and said that we can get in touch with them and ask them to get access to their stores wherever we're based. And this is great, but it could be waste wash as well, because there's this big marketing offensive from Tesco saying how amazing they are, and we want to make sure we're not complicit in a false advocacy of how good they're getting. And actually we've got issues with their economic monopoly, not just that they're low waste. So we can share the lists of sources of surplus and share our experience. We don't yet have a pack, but that'd be great to get when we have a bit more time and resources to work it up. But yeah.
Oh yeah, that's we're working on, sort of putting funding bids together and sort of generating a bit of a sort of more long-term project that can roll on, that we could deliver or other people could deliver to schools, like around school dinners. Because and yeah, education for kids, I think it's especially hard to grasp the idea of not just wasting food on your dinner plate, but shops, because kids aren't responsible for their weekly shopping. So what's a 10-year-old going to have an influence on policy or what their parents' sort of, I guess, choices in the shops? But to actually, the link there is to get kids thinking about sort of the value of food, and that value is nutritional value and the value of sort of society and eating together, and that like generating a nice space for people to eat and talk, and it not just being a quick thing in front of the TV or like a school dinner. So to answer the question exactly, we've got a lot of thinking on that at the moment, but we haven't started really delivering anything. Fingers crossed, 2014.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask how, or if every company decides for themselves if they want to open their skips to the public, or if there's a law that says, oh, if I get food poisoning because I skipped your food, I can sue you.
We can both answer this. We go, when we contact the companies or the primary producers, really large farms, or go for industrial farms or really big manufacturers, and we do lots of Google searching and phoning around, and then we ask to speak to the operations manager or the head of corporate social responsibility on the phone, and then we get their permission, and we don't, for this is rubbish, we don't go in the bins. We do that in our personal lives, but we get them to donate the surplus that they know is existing in their supply chain. and that happens for loads of different reasons, but they have control and anticipation of what they won't be able to send to market or sell. So we go and pick it up in their yards, in their processing distribution centres, and with their permission. I mean, we had to get signed off by the local health agency, the local food authority standards to do these public feasts. And they came and had a meeting with us, and they were horrified that we might be getting food out of a bin and feeding it to innocent public people, and we're like, we are not getting food from a bin, and we had to do the same collection sign-off process as you would of picking up stock if you were to buy it. So you had to have the paperwork to prove that it was in good condition, in date, and perfectly edible, which all this food is, which is the kind of irony.
How is it okay for you to do that, and then other shops say they're not allowed to health and safety?
I think it's to do with permissions. I'm not sure. I mean, if you trespass and go into the backyard of a bin, I know it's called theft by finding, and that's what you can get done for, which is this idea of it's no one's. You find a wallet in the street, it's no one's. You find it, but you assume ownership of it, and that's what you can get kind of accused and fined for, and trespassing as well. But if you go with permission to access this edible food with a relationship with the individuals in the organisation, it's just to do with permission and transparency, and that's why we don't, as an organisation, advocate bin diving, but as individuals in the organisation we do. But it's just to kind of make sure that we are all transparent and legal and covering public interest when we go and feed people, because we don't want it, people going, you said it was fine and I got arrested, like shit, okay? But you've got a bit more to add to that, probably, haven't you, the legalities of sourcing?
Yeah, just so quickly, so in America they have a thing called the Good Samaritan Law, and that explicitly deals with this problem. And that is set up to mean that if a supermarket donates to, say, a food charity, that they're protected from being sued in the one, it barely ever happens, 1 in a million chance that someone gets ill. But then, if that does happen, it gets blown out of proportion in the press, the company then would potentially get scared off from donating. So that's something I think would be really great to have in the UK. But at the moment, there is the beginnings of quite a lot of food redistribution in the UK, and what basically, I think, there's a whole range, essentially, and I think if you're a larger distribution company like FairShare, so FairShare is one of the largest food redistribution networks in the UK, and they have depots around the country where they're collecting kind of quite large proportions of, large quantities of food from supermarkets, and they can get away with it because they're a formal company and they have all the processes set up and stuff like that. But actually how much they're taking is probably only about 1% of supermarkets' waste at the moment, and they're feeding something like 300,000 people a year on that at the moment. So, but then if you're looking at doing sort of smaller local things, so I run a sort of small group called Food Not Bombs in my area, which is just like a lot smaller and less formal. And in that case, you can usually sort of build it on relationships of trust with sort of small bakeries and small, farmers markets and stuff like that. And it is just a case of explaining to people, we're going to use this and cook it up at a homelessness store or something. And they're usually pretty, but the big boys like Tesco need a bit more,
I just want to say, it is upon building relationships. Some shops might say no, and some shops might say yes. I think, as Kat mentioned about things being in date, there's also, there's a lot of stuff around the labelling on food, and I just wanted to mention that the best before date, it's not actually illegal to sell stuff that's past the best before date, but shops will presume consumers aren't going to buy stuff past the best before date, and therefore it gets wasted. So if you can find that stuff from shops and tell them that you're happy to take it, obviously check it as well, use common sense, but that's not illegal.
I just want to share an observation I had on picking up some food from Bristol Wholesale Market yesterday morning at 7 in the morning. We got a lot of parboiled potatoes in these bags, and they were dated the 8th, 9th of August, and obviously we're not quite there yet. They were going to waste, and that's an illustration of a really long, convoluted supply chain. And there's lots of reasons for large-scale food waste, but one of them, we've got a huge distance of time to get the primary produce, the potato, into parboiling, into vacuum packages, into the catering systems and the retailers that will be using it. So if we can shorten and streamline our supply chains, and also the kind of bulk buying that supermarkets do of really kind of primarily aesthetically perfect looking fruit and vegetable drives a lot of waste. And there's another thing called contingency buying. For example, sandwiches are marked up by 215%. So on a busy day, on a peak day, you might get 200 more purchases. And if you just sell your base number and like plus 20, you've covered the cost of producing those extra 200. So you're in profit, so it doesn't matter in an economic term if you waste those 180 sandwiches. So big supermarkets often overbuy to cover their peak demand that might happen, and they can maximise their profit, but they've already paid the cost of producing those sandwiches, and they don't care about the inherent value of the food. So that's another issue of like the model of abundance and excess of product that is this illusion of always available food stuff that isn't really the case, and you might have a... Yeah.
Just a little bit. Yeah, so I think one of the really interesting things that we've been dealing with, which is kind of dealt with, I think, less in, unfortunately, in some of the mainstream kind of food waste kind of literature, is kind of power relations within the supply chain. And that's not a very fashionable politically thing to mention in a kind of pro-free market kind of environment. But what we see, we have kind of hourglass supply chains in the UK, which are, a large number of producers on one side, a large number of consumers on the other, and then a very tiny number of people like Tesco controlling the kind of bottleneck between the two. And this results in some quite interesting kind of like dynamics where kind of the benefits for the people in this bottleneck can often override the benefits to the people at either end. And the cosmetic standards is an example of that. So the supermarket gets to put beautiful food that attracts more people to their store, brilliant, but then they don't have to bear, they can externalise, they get all the benefits of the cosmetic standards, but they can push the cost of that onto the farmer, and they have to bear the cost producing all of that food. Nature produces diversity of food, and because that cost is externalised, they don't have an incentive to deal with it. And likewise with so I think that we talked to a lot of people in our research, and there was often an assumption, especially amongst policy circles, that, well, of course, if you're a business, you're going to reduce your waste because less waste is more profit, so that the free market will just sort it out. But we see very clearly in situations like this that if you're pushing the cost onto other people and onto the environment, so if you're profiting but the environment suffers, then that isn't built into the free market system, and that's something that we need to look really seriously at. Just quickly as well, another cause of a lot of food waste is kind of last-minute order cancellations. So you get a situation where a supermarket will speculatively say, oh, we need 2,000 sandwiches next week, we expect this. But then come the end of the week, and a manufacturer will produce this dutifully, but then the supermarket will say, actually, we don't need this food after all. And sometimes the manufacturer won't be able to either sell that to another person in time before it goes off, or they'll actually physically be in a contract that forbids them from selling to other people. And we've seen this actually. We did a Feeding the 5,000 event in Kenya. The Feeding the 5,000 group feeds 5,000 people in sort of big events. We did one in Nairobi, Kenya recently for quite a few people from the UN who are really interested in food waste at the moment. And we sourced all the food from that from local producers, and a lot of them are in Kenya exporting to UK supermarkets. And we actually had this situation where there's this French bean producer who told us that they frequently ship vast quantities of French beans to the supermarket in the UK on the hope that they'll be able to sell it, and only to be told once they get there, actually we don't need this. So obviously that's A, waste, and B, incredibly socially unjust because you have poor producers bearing the cost of this insane situation. And there's a bit of regulation going on around that at the moment in the Groceries Code Adjudicator Act. Sounds very dry and boring, but it's quite exciting if you're into food waste. There's somebody now who can enforce if things like that happen, they can punish the supermarkets, and they're an external body. Formerly it was all regulated by the supermarkets themselves, which doesn't really make sense. Yeah, so that's a bit of progress.
The thing you're talking about with the producers and the consumers, I think it's a really important bridge to there's quite a divide really. I mean, I did a countryside management degree in agricultural college, and you always have the agrics who are the food producers who then they use a lot of machines, they do use a lot of chemicals quite often, but they have their own issues with the food production, like with the milk, recently farmers throwing lots of milk away, and it's been ongoing for a long time now. So, and then you have producers who want a better quality product, who want something nicer, but there's often not that link between the two, and there's not much dialogue, and people don't really understand the problems farmers have and the way that the pressures that are put on them by supermarkets. And I think that it's a really important thing to try and get that conversations and information from one to the other, and actually get them to meet each other, and especially with green food, so there's a bit of a kind of they're hippies and that attitude from the farmers, and so it's really, really interesting, I think.
Say something quickly and then pass it to you. So basically, yeah, absolutely. And one of the really interesting things about doing this research was talking to a really broad range of people and seeing, there are differences, but there are also quite a lot of overlaps. And obviously, the process of building solidarity and broad movements between consumers and producers is really important. And often, as we discussed, there's an assumption that, businesses will be automatically against measuring their food waste and reporting it, that sort of thing. And that results from a kind of being cut off, politicians perhaps being cut off from the people, sort of building these discussions and bringing these, the reality of this out into the open has been one of the great things about this report. But also, just doing things like the gleaning, seeing things like the wonky vegetables, absolutely. There's actually a lot of farmers obviously want this produce that they spent ages growing to go to the supermarkets, and then also I think there's been an assumption often that consumers are too fussy, they don't want wonky vegetables. But actually there's a lot of ambiguity about the causal relationship going on there. Has this been cultivated to a certain extent by the supermarkets in consumers? Does it even exist in consumers? There was a study recently by the Institute of Mechanical Engineers which interviewed people and said, do you like wonky vegetables? And a lot of people said, yes, I actively seek them out, and the majority of people said that they don't care. So there's an issue of, is this the supermarkets not understanding consumers, or, so opening these dialogues I think is really constructive.
I just kind of want to comment on your comment. Tim Lang and Jack Tamsin talk about food as a lens. You can frame lots of different issues through the sort of bigger lens of food. And I think talking about food waste really almost lets you shift the telescope to lots of different kind of structural and relational issues within our food system. And this idea of linking the power of retailers back to primary producers and how the retailers shape the methods of production and also the distribution of that subsequent produce is a really great lens that food waste you can zoom into so many different framing of issues within the food system through food waste, because it definitely has the power of outrage and kind of shock. And I think it's really worthwhile, I think, using these springboards of kind of compelling issues that then let you dismantle more deeper systemic problems, like who's controlling who, what's the power relations, how independent or autonomous are primary producers to have a secondary market or access to redistribute produce that they might have been bound into a guaranteed, what are the words I'm looking for, kind of distribution of their stock. And I just think the bigger lens of food waste is a really powerful big picture frame to look at all of these other subsets of issues. And one of them is exactly that, linking up the relationship to how and who grows our food and who dictates how it is entering into our market and being packaged, modified, standardised, and sort of bulk produced at a ridiculously overpriced cost level. So I just really like the idea of little lenses within a bigger picture frame, and food waste is one of those entry-level conversations that opens up a lot of associated issues. Last question? Yeah.
Just wondered what your view was of food banks, because of I know, like, from being in Bristol and reading stuff recently, there's been a massive increase in the use of food banks, which obviously it's good that people can access that, but on the other hand, it's also sort of, if you're being quite harsh about it, sort of like propping up the fact they can reduce benefits and things like this. It's sort of like there's a real tension there. I wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Right. That's a really difficult one, and really complicated, and one of the most, politically challenging aspects of food waste. I think basically food waste reduction and redistribution can be used in loads of different political contexts and loads of different ways. And yes, absolutely, we have to be really careful that food redistribution isn't co-opted into a means of papering over other deeper problems. I think we look at, there's a thing called the food waste pyramid, which is kind of like a reduce, reuse, recycle type thing. So from an environmental perspective, it is best to reduce it first, redistribute it to humans second, then feed it to pigs, then compost it, that sort of thing. But then absolutely, from a social perspective, we have to look at kind of the deeper problems of poverty and make sure that we're continuing to oppose things like the cuts. Also that, food redistribution could be supported by the state in addition to welfare services, so that it's not like one or the other. And also food redistribution can be used as a means to get people out of poverty as well. So, I mean, in a sense that, so for instance, Fair Share, they're providing food often to homeless services that would be buying food otherwise. So they're getting that food cheaper, so that actually liberates resources for them to then spend on other social programs. So, used in the right way, it can just liberate resources. So both, reduce environmental impact, which often disproportionately affects the poor, climate change, affects the poorest people in the world, but also strengthen the welfare state. But yeah, I think absolutely there's a real importance, and one of the things that This Is Rubbish, I think, have been really concerned to do is look at, the reduction of food waste, environmentally desirable, but also things like if you bring wonky veg into the supermarkets, that's going to bring potentially cheaper food into the food system, and that will then hopefully, design out the need for food banks, because we're bringing the food that would have been wasted, stopping it from being wasted, putting it on the shelves, and allowing greater access to that in the first place. So I think with things like the Gleaning Network, for instance, we've been really keen, whilst the core of what we're doing is harvesting food and redistributing it via charities, we've been very keen to say, look, get the media in, create a bit of scandal about this happening, and say, well, yes, this is a stopgap for now, but like in the long term, what we want to do is design out this food waste and design out food poverty as just a stopgap. Yeah.
You just said what I want to say.
Okay, great, cool. Fantastic.
So, can you just tell people what information you've got here, how they can get in touch with you otherwise and get involved?
Oh dear. 3 hands, please. So, on the hay bale over there, we have, I think there's a few copies of the Counting What Matters, but if you want to look through those and leave them here, I don't think we've got many, but they are online. I think all the information we have here is online. We have our beautiful wine list.
In no particular order, by the way.
That was a prop from the Feast Tour. A bit more of the slightly fun, satirical side of things I have a look at. There's information about the Feast Tour itself and the evaluation report, which has got some lovely glossy photographs that shows what we're doing. Oh, most importantly, the pledge sheets are all over there. Have you got any pens?
One.
So make an orderly queue and make your pledge. It can be a pledge of something you're going to try and do in the future to have an impact on reducing industry food waste. It could be a comment, a suggestion, anything you like. We'll have a look at them. Might put some things on our website. And do help yourselves to the Hovis and the celery and whatever else like that, and a mailing list. Do you want to? We could put make a note next if you want to go on the Glean Network mailing list as well. Maybe just put GN or something next to it too, because this is rubbish. But we're pretty interconnected, as you can see. I think that's it. Thanks very much for listening. We'll hang around for a little bit over there by the pledge cards. If you've got any questions, come and speak to us.
And thank you to the
Thank you very much.